الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Center at New York University podcast, coming to you straight from the heart of New York City. We're building an amazing Muslim community here at ICNYU where everyone is welcomed and respected no matter where you're from or where you're at. This is the place to be. So open your ears and your heart and come along with us on another life-changing journey. Bismillah.
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So people want to pull up the text on their phones. We're looking at the Book of Assistance by Imam Al-Haddad. If you just Google Book of Assistance PDF, it'll pop up as the first link. We've been going through this text now for some months, alhamdulillah, and just going at it piece by piece. If you've missed any of the previous sessions, you can find them online and also find them on our podcast. And what the text does is it provides a framework, a roadmap around spirituality in our tradition. The chapters are very easily digestible. They're not so long. They present in this very concise format a method for its reader to utilize theory, concepts, practice, ritual in ways to get to a destination point of spiritual excellence. And so the chapter that we're on right now is the 5th chapter, which is on regular devotions, awrad, having a daily litany, a wird, right, which the text identifies it as recitation of the Quran, adhkar, prayers, etc. And so what we want to also think about are the relationships between the chapters, right? To not understand information in a religious sense in a way that we conceptualize topics separate from one another, but thinking about how do they connect to each other. You know, like you read Surah Fatiha theoretically 17 times a day in your prayers. What does the meaning of Surah Fatiha have to do with some of the concepts that we're looking at here? Or if you know other chapters of the Quran, right? Likely a lot of us know the smaller chapters, Surah Ikhlas, Surah Kawthar. You know, what does the meaning and message of Surah Kawthar have to do with Surah Ikhlas? How do we take the concepts that we understand and apply them and create connections so that they're not seen separate? And a society that tells us to compartmentalize our identity quite often as people who follow Islam as a religion, we then start to apply that compartmentalization to the study of religion, right? So here is theology, here is fiqh, here is spirituality, here is Quran, here is hadith, here is this, here is that, rather than seeing how do they kind of synergize and inform one another and play a role in connecting us at a deeper level to ourselves and then towards our Creator. Does that make sense? So what I want you to do for just a couple of minutes to get people kind of talking to each other. I know it was a very cold day outside today. At least that was really cold. And I know also we did not meet last week, right? And maybe we didn't meet for 2 weeks or just 1 week. I don't remember. But I know it's definitely 1 week at least. So just for us to kind of get things going, if you haven't been with us, that's fine. There's a table of contents to the book that gives you the chapters. The first chapter is on yaqeen, certitude, like deep kind of faith, committed faith, right? It's a destination point that Imam Al-Haddad sets. The way that you believe that these lights will work when you come into the room is the way that you want to have belief and faith in the divine, right? The way that you can affirm that you go back to wherever you live, there's going to be water that comes out of the faucet. You have reasonable faith in certain things. You want to be able to exercise a similar paralleled sense of conviction in things that stem from religion. This is what yaqeen is, like a certitude in faith. From there he goes into niyyah, intention. You know why you do what you do before you do it. Then he goes into muraqabah. You're essentially looking over your heart, so your heart looks over you. These are all actions of the heart, the first 3 chapters. They're things that you're doing even prior to moving forward but embedded in the steps that you take. And then he talks about the inner self and the outer self in the 4th chapter. And then this 5th chapter that we're in the middle of, he talks about awrad, having a wird, like a daily litany. What I want you to do is just turn to the persons next to you, ideally in pairs, right? No more than 3, just because we want everybody to speak. And if you're sitting and there's not somebody next to you, just turn around and talk to the persons behind you. What is the connection so far between these 5 topics? Yaqeen, Niyya, Muraqabah, the inner and outer self, and awrad, right? Certitude, intention, vigilance of the heart, the inner and the outer self, and having a daily litany, a wird. How do we see connections across all 5? Maybe how any of them relate to each other. How does intention relate to a wird, right? How does yaqeen relate to a wird? And anything that pops up to you, so you can start making those links. We can talk for a few minutes about that just in small groups and pairs. So everybody gets to talk and then we'll come back and discuss. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, go for it. Okay, so what are some of the things you're coming up with? What are some of the connections, the ways these concepts relate to each other? What did you talk about? Who wants to start? Yeah.
We talked about how all 5 of these things are about being, rather than being passive about your faith, it's about being active and mindful about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So instead of just going through the motions, you're setting an intention and you're focusing on the why you're doing what you're doing. And so all 5 of these things kind of relate to that.
Great. Any other thoughts? Connection? Can we have people, sorry, just if you can move in, because what will happen is people will come to the doors wanting to come in to pray, and they'll think that there's not enough room for them to pray. So if we can scoot in so that we leave kind of a pathway and people can pray in the sides of the room, that would be really great, inshallah. Yeah. What else? What else do we talk about? Yeah.
I kind of saw this, like the few chapters was kind of like this, kind of like an intertwining between like the physical being of a human, like flesh and bone, but like that and being intertwined with like spirituality and faith and like for instance, like when we talk about the heart, like there's the physical heart, then there's the spiritual heart. So I kind of see like these chapters are connected in a way. It's like those 2 planes are kind of being intertwined with each other. They're not just 2 separate entities.
Yeah, great. Maybe another way to frame this is, why did he go in this order with the chapters so far? Right? Like, why do you think there's kind of a thread in these steps rather than other things being talked about first? But whatever you discussed is fine too. What else did you talk about? Anybody?
I think these chapters shows like the difference between self-awareness and self-criticism. Because self-awareness helps us to lead to the self-love, like in a way that like we are Allah's creation and Allah created us like physiologically perfect. And self-criticism usually leads to the self-hatred. And self-hatred, it comes from, like, I know it sounds a little weird, but it comes from the ego in a way that when we think about ourselves and our mistakes, we think of like, we compare ourselves to perfection. And the only thing that can be perfect is Allah. So I felt like these chapters were built in a way that that will teach us how to be self-aware and not self-critical of ourselves. I don't know if that was clear or not.
Yeah, it was very clear, right? And all these things you want to think about, they're different topics and they have very different kind of modes of presentation, but you can distill still a commonality and a thread between them. You know, these types of things are important because when you study something rotely that has mechanics to it, the pursuit can be just about the form and the mechanic. It becomes an ends rather than a means to something, right? So if this is where I study and learn about God, and this is where I learn about mechanics of prayer, and this is learn how to make wudu and all of these things, you're still praying to God when you pray. But for a lot of us, because these past couple of weeks, this chapter on Awrad has been focused on like different things you can do within your wird. And the last time we met, we talked a lot about prayer in itself, right? Like, there's a difference in engaging the prayer ritually and praying the prayer mechanically, and praying a prayer that is about just the prayer and its performance versus praying a prayer to God. Do you get what I mean? Right? And it's very easy to perform an act that has mechanics to it and to not then connect that to its foundational purpose, which is meant to be a connector to the divine, because these are things that we think about separately or don't think about so much, let alone thinking about how they kind of go together. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? Yeah? Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to kind of just to piggyback on what you just said about kind of what is the order of everything, it's like you look at the certainty of things and you remember what you're certain about, Allah being one and the Prophet ﷺ being his prophet and messenger, and then that is a reinforcement for your intention. Use that with whatever you do, and then you become vigilant within it. It's a better awareness of yourself and what you're doing, and then you work on your inner self, your outer self, and it can go into your regular devotions. And so, I feel like kind of just like what you said, that's why there's a certain order to it.
Yeah, and you want to think how they build into each other, because it's an easy religion in the sense that it doesn't necessitate quote-unquote knowing so much, right? The bar to entry is not up here to be Muslim. The bar to entry is pretty low because it claims to be a religion for all people of all backgrounds till the end of time. So it doesn't necessitate this kind of idea of being like a super Muslim all the time, that makes us fall into this idea of self-hate and self-deprecation. I'm not good as the person next to me. Do you know what I mean? But where and how you can draw meaning from things at a deeper level, and you can reflect on why Imam Shafi would say that, if somebody, all they know of the Quran is Surah Al-Asr, that's all that they know. It suffices for them, right? Surah Ikhlas, our tradition teaches us, is a third of the Quran in its equivalency of its meaning, right? How is that possible? It's not saying memorize the whole book, and I'm not downplaying that, but to be able to take from it, make connections, and to just think deeply about it. And then how do I actualize this based off of what it's trying to teach me? So it's not an identity variable, but it's something that goes a little bit deeper than that, right? It's an entire philosophy on life that I'm kind of adhering to, so to speak. If we go to the text, in the middle of the chapter, we're on page 19 of that first link that comes up, where we were looking at last week, the paragraph that says, "Know that the ritual prayer has an outer form and an inner reality. You will not have established the prayer and its outward properties such as correct standing, prostration, tasbih,